My name is Aisha Adams, and today I will be doing a review for you all for the book A Framework for Understanding Poverty, A Cognitive Approach. This book is by Dr. Ruby K. Payne. So, the book begins by discussing similarities and differences in this book and a previous edition, noting that more recent studies have been completed since the last edition. She starts off by discussing myths of poverty. She leads into intergenerational transfer of knowledge, hidden rules of classes, and poverty's effect on thinking. One of the main goals of this text, I believe, from reading it, is to aid educators with resources to help students and families increase their intergenerational transfer of knowledge, help educators understand poverty's effect on thinking, the way that the students interact with the faculty, the staff, and their classmates, and to help them see that, if you have not experienced poverty, that everything that people say about poverty is not true. The first thing that we need to do is establish a definition for the word poverty. So, according to the text, the word poverty is defined as the extent to which an individual does without resources. This is a bit different from the initial assumption of the meaning of poverty, because a common consumption is that people who are in poverty merely have extreme financial restraint or are homeless, which is not always the case. An individual could own a home and have a job, but still suffer from poverty because he or she lacks necessary resources. A common misconception amongst middle and upper class individuals is that poverty is a choice or way of life that individuals experiencing it choose to remain a part of, which is not always the case. Children, for example, have no say in the matter and must use the resources provided between home, the community, and school. Educators should provide as many resources as possible to show students that poverty is more than a financial restraint and that there is a way to be successful and leave poverty. It also must be understood that there are different types of poverty, such as situational and generational. On one hand, you have a situation that may drive a family or a person into poverty, and then there are situations where people are born into poverty and there are certain ways of life that the person is accustomed to that signifies poverty. So some of the resources that affect poverty are finances, emotional, mental and cognitive, spiritual, physical, the support system, role models, the knowledge of hidden rules, language, and formal register. The reality is that many students do not have these resources, and it can dramatically affect behavior and performance in the classroom. She does include many case studies throughout the text. I'm not going to dive too deep into all of them, but the gist is that poverty causes a domino effect. One thing triggers another, which triggers another, and the student may have just a catastrophic event at home, such as the unexpected death of a parent or a parent working multiple jobs, so the child is forced to parent their siblings. She does discuss the 3 different voices that children have in their head. They have the adult voice, which is the voice where they speak maturely and they speak with understanding. They speak in a way that they can communicate with an adult. They have the parent voice. This is usually a more authoritative voice where they want to be in control. They use this voice when they are afraid, essentially. They want to be acknowledged as an individual and they don't want to be afraid. They want to save face in front of their peers. And the third voice is the voice of a child, where they act their age. They speak as a person of their age group. So these are some of the ways that poverty can affect their interactions with peers, administration, and teachers. She does dive into discipline pretty deeply. The chapter is pretty lengthy. A quote that I could definitely relate to in the discipline section was, "Children from poverty enter school with an entirely different understanding of what rules are, and this causes a lot of frustration in the school because of the mismatch. Many times rules are set in place for a more ideal classroom or a middle class type setting, which does not exactly work with the hidden rules that are a part of a poverty situation in the classroom." Students from poverty have a different understanding of what rules are and what authority is, how to handle certain situations as far as how they speak to one another, what respect is, who deserves respect, who doesn't deserve respect. And a very important part of the section is, why do students behave the way that they do? Do they believe that it's okay? Is there positive reinforcement? Is there negative reinforcement? There is a chart with behaviors and suggested interventions. An example of one of the behaviors is a student laughing at a teacher when they are being disciplined or redirected. Many times they do that to save face in front of their peers because they don't want to feel like a child, which they are. One thing that a teacher could do is redirect the student and say, okay, what else could you be doing? What other behaviors could you be engaging in, instead of just yelling at the student or sending them to an administrator? Educators are encouraged to allow students to be a part of the discipline process. Give the students time to reflect. Have them answer these 4 questions that are listed on this slide. What did you do? When you did that, what did you want? List 4 other things you could have done instead of the choice you made. What will you do next time? This gives the child time to reflect on what they did, what they can do better, and how they cannot end up in the same situation again, as opposed to just sending them home for 2 or 3 days suspension. Dr. Payne also includes a few questions that the teacher can ask him or herself in regards to the student that they are disciplining. What kinds of behavior does the student need to be successful? So, what can the student do to be successful? What can they do to stay out of trouble? Does the student have the resources to develop these behaviors? So does the student have a role model? Have they seen the behavior that you're expecting modeled in the classroom? Do they know how that they are supposed to behave? Will parent contact help? Many times calling a parent will help, but there are times where the student does not have a positive relationship with a parent, and calling does absolutely nothing. Will the behaviors be taught? Will someone model these behaviors for them? What other choices could the student make? We have the student answer the 4 questions, and they have to list 4 behaviors that they could have done differently. But does the teacher know what other behaviors could be done? Because the student may not. What will help the student repeat successful behavior? So do you have positive reinforcement set in place? Hidden rules among classmates. So throughout the text, hidden rules are discussed quite frequently, but they are not defined very often. So the way that she defines them in chapter 3 and also in chapter 1 is, hidden rules are the unspoken cues and habits of a group, and these hidden rules make it easier to distinguish who's a part of the group and who is not. And it could be social class, where a person is in poverty, versus middle class versus upper class. And there is the possibility of moving up to a different class, but in order to move to that different class, the person in the class that is trying to move needs to be affiliated with someone who is a part of that class already, so that they can learn the hidden rules of the said group that they are trying to move to. So, for example, if a person is in poverty, but they would like to move to middle class, they would need to be affiliated with someone in middle class so that they know we don't go to check exchange places. You should have a direct deposit set up to your checking account at a bank, or you should have a cell phone bill monthly instead of putting minutes on your phone every couple of days, or things of that nature. So they need to know what the hidden rules are. Students learn from interaction with other people in their social groups. And Dr. Payne provides resources for teachers to help them understand poverty a little bit better, or help them understand middle class a little bit better, help them understand upper class a little bit better. And there are a couple of quizzes where they ask questions of, would you be able to survive if you were living in poverty? Would you be able to survive if you were living in middle class? Would you be able to have any type of relationship with a person that is of upper class or middle class or poverty, and so on? According to the text, low achievement is closely correlated with lack of resources. A goal of the educators is to improve achievement of those whose socioeconomic status affects their achievement. It also goes into defining genetic determination and defining it as the notion that intelligence is inherited rather than acquired, and theorized by the use of IQ tests to predict success that an individual will attain. In essence, if a child comes from an educated family that does not lack resources, he or she is more likely to follow suit with success because of early exposure to certain skills. A child who does not come from an educated family and is on welfare is not expected to be as successful unless he or she makes the conscious decision to do what is necessary to attain resources for success. So, a common misconception that I found interesting in the text was that if you teach well enough, then learning will occur. I found that Dr. Payne's realistic approach to poverty was refreshing because all of the weight is not put on the teacher. Dr. Payne acknowledges that if a student does not want to learn, they will not learn. If they don't have the necessary background knowledge, it doesn't matter how well you teach. The knowledge won't be absorbed because the student cannot relate or make inferences. So here is a list of what teachers should do instructionally to aid students who are experiencing poverty and lack prior knowledge or exposure to the topic at hand. Chapter 9 goes into great detail of explaining 8 key issues that the instructors should focus on. They include mental models, vocabulary building, direct teaching processes. That includes how you are going to do what you're doing in the classroom. Student developed questions. You have to allow students to develop questions about what they're supposed to be learning. Making learning relational. They need to be able to form relationships with their peers and ask each other questions. Do a little bit of peer tutoring. Enhance content comprehension. Evaluate and calibrate student work, and create a future story. So with creating a future story, that goes back to making learning relational. How can I use this at a later time in life? How is this lesson going to help me outside of this classroom? So in conclusion, I would say that this text is definitely a great text. It hits all of the main areas of concern in regards to working with individuals who are directly impacted by poverty. Concerns are addressed as far as class differences, beliefs of certain classes, and many myths are debunked. Any individual who has not experienced poverty firsthand would at the very least have a better understanding of what poverty is and be able to acknowledge that living in poverty is not a choice for every individual who is impacted by poverty.